All right, so we are back here covering the last part of Chapter 1 that we're going to cover, at least at this part of the unit. The Section 1.4 will cover when it comes to industry and development. That is, it just fits more in that line, and this also kind of fits to kind of cover up and get done with the first unit here. So in the previous part of Section 1.3, we talked about space and distribution. Now we're talking at the idea of diffusion, which kind of helps with this idea of space and distribution and why things are kind of located the way they are. So diffusion itself explains the different ways and ideas and products move across the globe. And that's going to be something we're going to really continue on with here, but also keeping in mind the idea of globalization. All right, now, so if we were in class, I would have you do this. What is your favorite restaurant or fast food place? How many are that you know of or have been to? And are they all the same in terms of what they look like, the feel, the menu options, things like that. So typically, things like, McDonald's, Chipotle, Canes, just kind of really quick examples of those. And, are all those layouts the same? Do they serve all the same food? What changes are there, if any? Things like that. So this is something to consider kind of as we look through this, but also, again, within the context of the rest of the unit. Why are so many unique places similar to one another, even though they're in different locations? So what accounts for a lot of that is this idea of globalization. So actions or processes that involve the entire world and result in making something worldwide in scope. And this connects to the idea of diffusion that we'll talk about kind of in the second half. And globalization is not anything new. Globalization has been going on for centuries. In fact, millennia, when you talk about, connecting what was the known world and civilizations to one another across Africa, Asia, and Europe, and, throughout the Americas. Before their contact with the rest of the world. So this is nothing new, just the way in which it has been happening has obviously changed and developed differently over time in different processes. Okay, so globalization makes it easier for people to communicate or spread ideas and goods with others across the planet because, again, transportation technology continually improve. All right, so now we're able to talk with someone via Japan or in Japan via Facebook or, the latest thing, Zoom, has allowed us to kind of have that kind of global contact rather than waiting several months, if not years, to get in contact with somebody from the other side of the globe. So obviously those technologies have kind of developed and changed over time. And so kind of what happens with a lot of this, or what has been propelling a lot of it, is the search for money or economics. All right, so transnational corporations, they conduct research, they operate factories in many places and sell products in many countries, not just where their headquarters are located. Now, that's not the only reason why globalization happens. Okay, we can also talk about, cultural diffusion, which is something we're going to come back to as well. Just local trade, other types of investments, just things that push and bring people together. All right, so different areas are involved because of the factors involved, such as where is it cheapest to have locations of stores, where is it cheap but efficient to have our workers located, and how many workers do we need, what resources are available, how is it going to cost to transport these things to and from locations, and where are the people that are going to be buying our products or our services, where are they located. So all those kind of play into why we find a lot of different businesses spread throughout the globe, but also what makes these companies transnational within that. I have the Nike symbol down here as kind of that example of where we talk about where Nike factories are located, but also where do they sell, where are their headquarters, where are their research departments and development squads. All those happen in different parts of the world because it's a global company. It has global ambitions and global appeal. All right, so and the world typically can seem bigger as a result of globalization, but it also can in fact be smaller because, again, we talk about the idea of what we call the space-time compression because of the amount of energy and the amount of time it takes to get from one place to another and bring things around the globe space-time decay has gone down as we've gotten more involved. Okay? And something to consider here is, does every person or every culture want globalization? Do they want to connect with other cultures, or does everyone want to connect on the same level or in the same ways? Not every culture does, and I'm not going to give any real specific examples here, but think of some on your own at this point, because that's going to come into the issues with political geography and ethnic geography later on. And then what are the issues when we get, cultures that kind of clash with each other? All right. So globalization leads to taking on different cultures. So we have the two ideas here, assimilation and acculturation. So assimilation is when a culture takes on the traits of another culture, becoming more like them, and it becomes harder to distinguish between the different groups because they are kind of the blending of things in that. So we talk about an example here of Europeans bringing their way of life to the indigenous peoples of America or of the Americas, so bringing in Christianity, bringing in the English and Spanish and French languages, their styles of clothing. All right, and typically that gets assimilated either forcefully or voluntarily by the native populations or indigenous populations. As we know, it's more of a mixed bag, but in many cases it was voluntary, and over time it became more forced, depending on which cultures you're talking about specifically. Acculturation is when a culture takes on the traits of another culture but keeps what makes them unique. So they take on certain aspects of a culture, but they still retain their own unique folk culture. All right, and this is going to be something we come back to in Chapter 4 when we talk about just the idea of culture itself. So keeping this idea with the indigenous populations, talking about American Indians retaining tribal ceremonies, language, clothes, but drive Japanese cars and live in, the suburbs. So they're taking on things that would be considered, American or global, but also keeping within their indigenous beliefs and practices at the same time. All right, and so typically it's a balance trying to do these two things within acculturation and assimilation. And, there's no right or wrong to it. It's all about, personal beliefs and values, but it is something to kind of pay attention to and understood. Assimilation, though, as we kind of were leading to before we mentioned acculturation, is oftentimes forced by other cultures. And this also leads to an uneven development within globalization because not all countries develop evenly. And when we get to the development chapter, there's going to be something we expand on there, too. There's a large gap increasing between our core and periphery countries. We're thinking about countries that have and countries that have not. Okay, which countries have paved roads, better Wi-Fi access, constant electricity? Which countries get the new iPhone first? Something to consider now in the fall of 2020 when we get, if and when we get a vaccine for COVID-19, which countries and populations are going to get that first and which ones are going to get it later? So there's uneven development between countries and also inside of countries because not everything develops at the same time at all points in the country either. So that is something that's going to come up way later throughout the course. All right. So an idea here, typical garment and fresh produce with global supply chains, okay, where are they made versus where are they sold, all right? So the green is the fresh produce, where do you find them? Garments, where are they made? And then where are the primary buyers and consumers of them, okay? And there's a connection to colonialism there too. So globalization leading to similar landscapes, but also can permit cultural identity. So McDonald's within somewhere in the Middle East. I believe this to be Japan. It could be China. I'm not exactly sure, and I apologize if I get those wrong. But, the different types of the numbers of McDonald's stores, and again, this goes back to, I'm not exactly sure what year, but at the earliest 2013, if not earlier than that. So you see, McDonald's exists throughout all these different countries, and obviously they change parts of their menus based on where they are going to get, different brands and where things are going to appeal based on their things. So culture, again, becomes really, really important because you're not going to find a whole lot of people in India eating a regular, Big Mac because of the type of meat involved there. So try to make that different. So the idea comes now to diffusion, how we diffuse and kind of put this into perspective within the ideas of assimilation and acculturation. So acculturation, you're taking on McDonald's, but again, you're making it more based on your more uniqueness, more your local stuff. So within diffusion of this stuff, within globalization, we also talk about hearth, all right? This is a place where an innovation initially develops, and it's kind of key. Where does it spread from? And again, these are ideas that are going to, again, come and spread throughout the entirety of the course. So diffusion is how characteristics of a culture, information, ideas, behaviors, clothing, religion, whatever, spread. Okay, and there are three types. So it has to come from a hearth, and it has an interaction between two or more cultures. All right, and there are two basic types, and we'll kind of expand beyond that within the expansion type. Relocation is just the spread of a culture through physical movement. So literally thinking people picking up their bags and moving from one area of the world to another. That's essentially just relocation diffusion. Okay, they're just moving from one part of the globe, bringing their culture with them to another. The other is the expansion diffusion. Okay, and there are several types of that. And so this is the spread of one culture to another, adding to the receiving culture. So this connects itself to globalization, assimilation, and acculturation through that international contact. Okay, and again, a lot of this stuff is just coming right out of the textbook. Not exactly sure. There we go. That kind of came up weird. I wanted this to do more of a breakdown over time, but whatever. We'll also look at this stuff more specifically in class with examples and try and work on, kind of example problems of it, or examples concepts of these types of diffusion. So the types of expansion diffusion, we have contagious diffusion, so it spreads like a virus. Kind of ironic that this is being mentioned during the time of COVID, but it is spread like a virus. So first to closer places, then to further away places with more limited access. Not as many people may have contact to it. So it's related to the idea of distance decay and unequal access. So the further away you are from something, either physically or in terms of the materials and resources you have, the less likely you are to understand this stuff coming in. So again, the idea could be kind of like a virus. But it could also be something like, if you're living in a country without the internet, you're probably not, or without adequate internet access, you're probably not familiar with a lot of things from American culture within the idea of what music is popular, what's the most viral videos, the things on Vines or memes that are really popular right now, or TikTok, catchphrases from movies. Might go over your head if you don't have, again, that consistent access to, things coming out of the United States. Hierarchical diffusion is the spread of culture from points of authority or really important people or cultural places. Not spread evenly, can jump from one place to the next. It can, again, connect to the idea of distance decay and unequal access, but not always. So the idea of cell phones being designed by major brands or companies or corporations or people. Cell phones coming out of, the big people, Apple and Motorola and Microsoft, people just kind of in development with Androids, video games, but also people influencers, okay, passing down cultural traits because they are considered important or really big people with really important concepts. Also, the idea is reverse hierarchical diffusion, moving from the lower class to the higher class. So to quickly click on this video here is Walmart. Hopefully this works. I haven't looked at it again in a few years, but let's give it a shot. So the spread of Walmart, the new store turns into an existing store once it goes in through a year. So you can kind of see this spread of Walmart, more of a family store, at least initially, spreading and diffusing. You see that concentration getting more dispersed throughout the United States and not just being, heavily clustered, obviously, in the South and Midwest. We'll stop it here in 2005, but, dang it, missed it by a second. There we go. So 2004, it becomes more dispersed, but it's still heavily clustered in the South where it originated within Arkansas. But it's still, again, an example of the reverse where it starts off as kind of like a small mom and pop store and then expands over time. All right, so back to here. We want to go back. Stimulus diffusion. I have diffusion written twice, so I apologize for that. Is when a culture adopts a main idea or process from another but modifies it to fit their own needs. So features from an iPhone or an Android being taken by their competitor and added to the next being added to it because they're taking it's similar to acculturation, but you're modifying to fit your own needs. And again, we'll look at more specific examples. Feel free to look at the book for other examples of these 3 or 4 types. And again, we'll play around with them and kind of give examples in class more or less. So really to kind of wrap this up, if you can connect the ideas of globalization, assimilation, diffusion, distance decay, and the space-time compression, do it. See if you can write out kind of a sense about how these things are connected, because those are really key ideas that are going to come back, obviously, throughout much of the course, especially when we talk again about migration and population in the next chapter. So that's where we're going to stop. And again, if you got any questions, as always, let me know. We can talk about more of this stuff more in class. So we'll stop ourselves there.